Have you heard how the internet went from just a million users to today more than 30 million people making a full-time income and more off of the web? Well, the commercialization of the web and how you can make money on the platform is the topic of this episode. And of course, we'll be covering a lot of tips and strategies of how you can convert and monetize your customers. I'm Robert Scrove, and this is the show that brings profit-producing secrets from the greatest marketers in the world. Welcome to today's episode. I am just thrilled that our guest today is Ken McCarthy, a true pioneer in internet marketing and the author of the groundbreaking book, How the Web Won. This book dives into the untold history of the internet's transformation from a technical curiosity into the world's largest marketplace and publishing platform, a transformation that Ken helped to ignite. Time magazine credits Ken with the fundamental insight that clicks have a commercial value, a principle that laid the foundation for online powerhouses like Google and Facebook. And his contributions don't stop there. Ken was the first to write about email as a marketing tool, a pioneer in banner ads, pay-per-click marketing, and online video. And he even laid the groundwork technologies for podcasting today. Ken is a master of internet marketing from the beginning, and today leads some of the most advanced internet marketing strategists. Ken, it's an absolute honor. Welcome to the Monetizers show.
Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Now, Ken, Time magazine credits you with the fundamental insight that really transformed the internet into the world's biggest marketplace. How did you recognize the commercial value of clicks?
Well, that's a good question. And you know, I don't want to tell people get the book to get the answer, but it's actually a long story. Like there were a lot of steps along the way. But the short version is it came down to desperation, because I was in San Francisco in the early '90s, and I saw the internet starting to percolate. The other thing that was happening in San Francisco at the time was digital interactive multimedia. And that was all going to be on CD-ROM. And if you're of a certain age, you kind of remember that phase. If you're not, you don't even know what I'm talking about.
Totally.
But to remind us and to inform people that didn't live through this, in the early 90s, many computer screens at people's homes were black and white. Like we didn't even have color, right? And before Apple came along, well, Apple, of course, did their Macintosh in '84. But even those screens were largely black and white. So the idea of audio coming from your computer, not happening. Mm-hmm. The idea of video coming from your computer, not happening. So in the early 1990s in San Francisco, a whole group of people were starting to work on this question of how do we put color? How do we put pictures? How do we, color pictures? How do we put video? So that was called multimedia, and that was a big deal. And so
I remember because I was at Florida State University as an undergrad in 91, and there was a professor. It was over in the communications department. And I was a grad student in accounting, and was taking an elective from a professor who, this was the new frontier, is really how to organize information in a meaningful way on a CD-ROM.
Right.
And, of course, 2 years later with the internet, all of that was arcane. But yeah, I remember this very well.
Well, that was in 90, 91, 92, 93, into 94. Even some people stayed too long at the party, into 95. That was the focus of San Francisco and of the whole high-tech community. And there's even a picture. It's quite rare. You don't really see Bill Gates playing the fool in photographs. But he actually, people can look this up on the internet, he staged a photograph where he was lifted up by a crane at the level of the height of a tree in the forest. And there were two stacks of documents as tall as the tree. And his point was, all these documents can be stored on a single CD-ROM.
Mhm.
That's how excited tech was about the CD-ROM in the early 1990s. So I was involved in that on the marketing side. There was a fellow named Hal Josephson, and he was the Johnny Appleseed of interactive digital multimedia, and he was funded by Microsoft and IBM and all the big tech companies that wanted. See, their motivation was they wanted this multimedia, color, video, audio thing so that people would go out and buy faster computers. Um, we're going to get really deep into the weeds. I hope people
Yeah.
enjoy this. But what there was a huge boom in the 80s with the personal computer industry, and a lot
Mhm.
of people got really rich really
Mhm.
fast. Software makers like Lotus, 123, and the PC makers, and everybody was just minting money. And then, like all markets, it saturated. And so in the early 1990s in San Francisco, it was like a ghost town. Now, anybody that knows San Francisco now, even with the horrors that it's going through, um, uh, San Francisco, I mean, rents, $3,000, $3,500 for a studio. Um, and, you want to buy a place, figure on seven figures,
Right.
I'm telling you, man, in the early 1990s, it was not that way in San Francisco. Uh, my wife and I moved into town. We wanted an apartment. We found one in a day. No waiting, no
Well,
list, no long group of people applying. The guy was happy to see us, and we were in a nice neighborhood. We were in Lower Pacific Heights, which is a really nice neighborhood. So the the economic climate of San Francisco was like devastation,
yes.
right? Because the PC market had lost speed. So the
Right.
dream of tech was, okay, we're going to get with these CD-ROMs. We're going to put audio on them. We're going to put video on them. Everyone's going to need to buy bigger computers. We're going to take film, and then the Hollywood said, oh, we got all these old films. We're going to turn them into interactive multimedia versions. We're going to get rich. So that was the dream. So that
Yep.
was the one thing that was happening. And I was looking at the numbers, and then I was also looking at the quality of these interactive CD-ROMs, and I'm like, I'm not sold that this is going to go anywhere, because to make it work, you had to sell them for about $50,
Wow.
40, $50.
Okay.
And all right, so one of the big interactive CD-ROMs of the time was the Beatles. There was like a Beatles concert or something, um, on a CD, or was a film about the Beatles, a documentary about the Beatles. And so, but the thing was, the video was like the size of a postage stamp, and it was like 10 frames. So it was like, it looked terrible, right? But everybody was so thrilled to see
Right.
video on I was going to say on the internet, to see video on their PC. People were like, this is the greatest thing ever. And I was looking at it and going, it's interesting, but it's not the greatest thing ever. And the
Mhm.
other thing too is, like, in those days, you could go to the movies for $5, or you could go to the what
Well,
I can't even remember
even
what they
three
call it.
dollars.
Yeah, three, right? In certain markets, right? In San Francisco, it was five, but in
Okay.
normal places, it was probably $3, right? And then if you wanted to rent a video, well, gee, you could do that for $2, and all your buddies or your family could all sit around. You could have
Right.
the video for 3 days. I mean, this was the world we lived in. Now, again, you and I remember this world. There may be a lot of younger people on this for whom this
Mhm.
sounds like, and then we churned our own butter. It's like, but
Mhm.
this is what the world was like pre-internet. So anyway, I'm looking at all this multimedia stuff, and I'm excited by it. It's interesting, and the people are interesting, and the energy was really high. But I couldn't see people paying $50 to watch a postage stamp size video. And they said, well,
Well,
but you can see the script on the left hand side. I'm like, well, okay, but $50?
and I think it's an important point because you were really on the forefront of the internet, and one of the key things that you understood was because of this conversation around multimedia and these CD-ROMs, you there was the clear understanding that that consumers would interact with them in a very different way than previous media. And even I remember on movies, you'd get a movie and there would be all kinds of other tracks
Right.
there. The bloopers, or there was other little videos that went along and complemented the movie, kind of as a package, that all of that has been lost as part of streaming, or to the extent it
True.
happens, it gets posted on
Yeah.
social media or YouTube. But there was a clear understanding that this new media was going to behave very different than the old. Even though Gates did the demonstration of the stacks of media or books, or like, oh yeah, the CD-ROM holds this, but they knew it wouldn't be just a stack of books. It would have to interact differently. And I think that's one of the key lessons of your book. It really, that can be translated into the future. Certainly there's plenty of monetization and a lot of that we're getting into, and I think this I'd like to get into too. But this whole idea of AI, the thing, a lot of people are generating text or generating photos, and and that's fine as far as it goes. But the innovators are recognizing that this is a very different media, as different from the CD-ROM and internet as a book. And people are going to interact with this in a very different way than they've interacted with other media. And so I think, that real lesson, there in the book of understanding what was, and your deep dive into movie audio, and matching that up to the video, and then these, all of that led to a very unique perspective
Right.
that the internet wasn't going to remain a text-based media, where you're simply consuming text like you did in before, but instead, you were one of the clear innovators of click to listen audio. And I think that that's really having this vision, I think, is really the clear lesson of the book.
Yeah, it's a challenge because, and that's why I had to write the book. There's so many interweaving, interacting pieces to the story. Um, but you make that's why it required a book to tell the whole story. But you make a really interesting point. The interactivity of it, and it started, believe it or not, it started with the VHS, because remember, I remember this. Maybe I don't know if you do. Like, let's say the Wizard of Oz. Like, this is gonna date me, but I think it's important for young people to know this because it will help them see how things travel, how things
Right.
change. When I was a kid, first of all, there were only 3 video channels
Mm-hmm. On
total,
the television, I
right?
remember.
Right. And then let's say they're going to show the Wizard of Oz. Now, the Wizard of Oz was cool because it was color. So, I mean, this is really embarrassing. We didn't have a color TV set until I was quite, along the way as a child, right? So finally we got one. And so the amazing thing was to watch the Wizard of Oz transform from black and white. It was, like in Kansas, and then suddenly it's in color, right? And we
Mm-hmm.
just sat around, we're like pie-eyed, we're amazed by this. But here's the thing, they only ran the Wizard of Oz once a year. So you had to know, hey, on March 5th at noon on
Mm-hmm.
Saturday. And so you would like write it down and everybody would sit around. This is how it was. So as soon as we had VHS tapes, and some people might not even know what those are. They're like DVDs, but on tape. And we have to tell people, because one of the points I make in the book
Yeah.
is that there are 4 billion people alive today that have no idea what we're talking about because they were born in 1990 and they never
90.
saw any of this stuff.
Mhm.
Okay, so VHS was the beginning of interactivity with media, because you could stop, you could pause, you could
Right.
rewind, you could play it again. If you were ambitious, you could set up 2 VHSs and make your own little primitive films. So that was the begin. And so here's the bottom line. Human beings like to interact with media. They like
Right.
to move it around and stop it and replay it and mash it up and screw around with it. None of that was possible until the 1990s. And the CD-ROM people, the multimedia interactive digital people were trying. They were doing. I mean, they were wrong, but they were right.
Yeah.
And what they were trying to do was make it possible for us to interact with our computers
Right.
and hey, I want to see that again, or I want to go from this video, I want to click on it and see notes, or I want to read notes and click on a hyperlink, and I want that to take me to a video. All that was pioneered by the CD-ROM multimedia people in San Francisco. And I was deep into that business because I was writing the ad copy for Hal Josephson, who was he was literally the Johnny Appleseed of that. He would go all over the country and teach. On the one hand, he would teach developers how to develop CD-ROM titles, and on the other hand, he would teach like ad agencies, PR people, corporate communications people. Hey, you guys do text, you guys do some video, you need to do CD, you need to do CD-ROM interactive as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I was as a freelancer, I was his copywriter
Wow.
for all his conferences. Then we
Yeah.
have the internet, and I tell the story about how I found the internet. Everybody has their own story about how they first came across it. But what blew me away instantly, and these were two independent streams. So I can't stress enough, and it's in the book, but I can't stress enough. The multimedia, interactive, digital, audio, video people, we're not talking to the internet people at all. I'm telling you, it wasn't happening. I'm the person that brought them together. They
Mm-hmm.
were not talking. The CD-ROM people said, well, we can't, modems are, I can't put video on a modem. I can't put audio on a modem. I'm lucky to put a picture on a modem because I don't
Well,
know if you
then,
remember, but like you'd hit the thing and the picture would like download. You can see it like
100%.
it's like paint drying on the wall, right? So they quite rightly in the short term, we're saying, well, this internet thing means nothing to us, right? I mean, imagine we're in San Francisco, we're in the digital cutting edge of the universe, and the most advanced people in multimedia were telling me that the internet had no relevance to them at all, right?
Mm-hmm.
The internet people on the other side were 99.999% engineers. And God bless them because we wouldn't have the internet without them. But they were engineers. They didn't have a marketing bone in their bodies,
Yeah.
right? And they didn't have a media bone in their bodies. Not their fault, not what they do. Like the guy, like I say in the book, we want the guys that build bridges to be a
Right.
certain kind of guy. We want them to really like get every number right and like really focus on the thing in front of them.
Right.
We don't want them to be wild, speculative. Hey, let's try a new kind of bridge that's never been seen before. Maybe not. Maybe not. The Romans figured it out. Let's not
We
mess
can
with
build
that.
it. I've got an idea for a bridge we can build in half the time for a third the price.
Right, we
Like,
could use styrofoam. Let's see if that works. No, 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 we don't want that, right? So that was the internet culture at the time. It was all engineers,
Mhm.
and they were doing beautiful, far-sighted things, but it was all technical and had nothing to. It had no connection to customer audience audiences at all. They were
Right.
just like, let's lay pipe, which is important. Like I always
Mhm.
say, we've gotten more public health benefits from the plumbers of the world than we've gotten from the medical system of the world.
Mhm.
And I'm not joking. Like the reason people are healthy today in developed societies is we have sanitation, we have indoor toilets, we
Yeah.
have water that's pure. That's an engineering function, right? And so
Mhm.
I feel the same way about the early internet engineers. Like we wouldn't be here without them, but they
Mhm.
had no ability to visualize how people were going to use it or cook up ways for people to use it. So there were these two tracks: the multimedia people and the engineers. And again, they were not talking.
Well, and I think it's fascinating the relationship that you had developed with Mark Andreessen,
Oh yeah, yeah.
the founder of the first web browser. It's like it's ubiquitous now, but there was a time that the internet existed, and there was no browser for it. You were simply putting in commands in a prompt in order to get what you needed, and and then the other thing that was really a third channel that we're not talking at that time were the direct response marketers. And
Well, but here's the thing. They didn't get it either.
exactly.
And I was right in, like I said, I was right in San Francisco, and I remember giving a talk to the Northern California Direct Marketing Club or Association,
Mhm.
whatever it's called, and they weren't they weren't terribly interested. It's like,
Because
and
they had
again,
their
even
mailing lists, they had their envelopes, they had their, like, what's this internet, and also they didn't have there were only a few people on it,
well, that,
and
and that's the chicken and egg of any network, right? It's like,
right,
it might be the coolest network that ever lived. You can, beam in 3D, you know, dancing girls and stuff. I mean, it could be amazing, but if if there's no content and nobody's using it, it's
yeah,
useless, right? And so, from a direct marketing point of view, hey, I'm already managing big mailings, and I'm producing spots. We're buying time on TV and radio, and I'm reaching people. And you're telling me about this thing that like a few million people use, and so they weren't buying it either. They didn't buy it. I'm tell you, they didn't really get it till I feel they didn't really get it until we started the system seminar, which was 2002. There were,
well, I
yeah,
and I'd like to, and I think that absolutely encourage folks to grab a copy of the book, How the Web Won, and I'd like to zoom into some of the wisdom that you have in applied to monetization today, because you wrote the book in 1991 titled "Testing: The Key to Direct Marketing Profits," and even though testing is far easier than it was, far easier today than it was, 35 years ago, still 99% of the internet marketers have this sort of set it and forget it sort of policy, and they're not really testing.
yeah,
How, when you're working with your clients, you're working with marketers, how do you get them to embrace this
yeah.
testing mindset that, even these direct response mail box professionals of 1991 were using?
Yeah, or even 1891. Testing and tracking is old as the hills. Well, I'm glad you asked that question. And this might be helpful to all consultants. What I do is I present the ideas as clearly as I can and the value of it. And the guys that get it, their eyes will light up and they're like, "Oh, wow, that's a great idea. I'm going to start doing that." If they don't have that reaction, I don't, they're never going to get it. You know what I mean? Some people get it. Like, I've literally seen people, you can just see the sparks fly out of their brain when they realize that they can test. And especially when they start testing and they like do simple A/B split tests and they go, wow, that headline did nothing. Wow, that headline's a killer. And they're like, I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't done this simple A/B split test. By the way, and Google considers the A/B split test the core of its success. And they didn't even start the doing A/B split tests until 2000. They'd been in business for 2 years, and it was one of their engineers who said, "Hey, let's A/B split test," And actually, the whole internet, all of big tech, Facebook and the rest of them, they all run on A/B split tests. So my answer to that is, I present it as clearly as I can, and I've had enough experience to know that those who get it will get it, and I can work with them, and those that don't get it, I can't do much for them.
Mm-hmm.
And even if, let me say this, even if you don't do a lot of testing on your own, realize that you can study the tested product of other companies, right? You can see, hey, if this ad's running a lot, they're spending a lot of money on these ads. They must know something, because I guarantee those folks are testing everything right
Right.
down to the nth degree. So that's one lesson you can get from testing is study the ads that you see a lot. The other lesson you can get from testing is humility. you know, um, nobody knows. Nobody knows. One of the biggest, I haven't done much. I mean, I still do video every now and then, but one of my biggest viral hits, and this was when McCain was running against Obama. So whatever that was like 100 years ago. I had like 1.5 million views. And that was a video literally that I threw together at the last minute, and I thought, I got to do something. I just got to get this done. It was like 11:59 p.m. and I'll just throw this thing out there, and what the hell, 1.5 million views later. And
Wow.
so you never know. And there's a couple lessons there. Number one, be prolific. The only way you're gonna, but actually, I got to tell you, there's some kids, and I call them kids because everybody to me under 40 is certainly a kid, maybe even under 50 at this point. But there are some kids, teenagers, like 17 years old. These kids understand testing.
Yep.
They understand reading stats as well as anybody who ever lived. In fact, that's something I'm doing a deep dive in myself. I'm just trying to get to know these guys
Yep.
because they're as good as it gets. So this medium, to take this to practical terms, this medium of online gives us the best testing platform we could ever hope for. And so use it, start using it. Run A/B split tests, run one headline against another, run one price against another. See which one wins. Go with the winner, drop the
Yep.
loser, and then immediately try to knock off the winner.
If you're enjoying the show, just a quick reminder to press the like button, subscribe to this channel for more useful monetization tips, and turn on notifications so you don't miss all the great tips coming up in future episodes. And thank you for sharing this episode with your friends and colleagues. I really appreciate that. It is pretty remarkable how the really young kids are using they're watching what works and testing and iterating, whereas I see the kind of even my generation and even the folks younger than us, I think of it like an escalator. For the generations before with direct mail and everything, it was kind of like you had to walk the stairs and everybody walked the stairs, and then escalators came out, and now people, instead of walking up an escalator and getting there in half the time, they stand on the escalator and let the escalator take them up. And I think that a lot of my generation and those younger have seen the internet and the much easier ways of generating new customers, the 10-cent click and then the quarter click and all of these things that allowed you to get customers so much more easier. They sort of stood on the escalator and let those technologies take them up. Whereas others, the younger kids are actually running up the escalator, and they're going to pass all of us because they're getting back, they're rediscovering for themselves these principles of testing that were ubiquitous in marketing 30 years ago.
You tell you what, ubiquitous where there was a lot of money on the line, right? So if you're
Yeah.
running infomercials or you're running like you can have the most successful infomercial in the world and blow yourself up financially if you're not tracking very carefully, because it's like an oil tanker. It's like, wow, we're carrying a lot of oil. This is fantastic. Oh, there's an iceberg there. We better divert, right? So that's why they had to watch their numbers basically really carefully, so they could pull the thing, refresh it, because you could easily blow all your profits in one bad month of media. Direct mail, really expensive media, very powerful media, very good media, but you can't just like wing it. Hey, let's just mail to 1 million people and see what happens. You can't do that, right? You make a really interesting point that there was this gap where it was kind of being online and building a following, building a mailing list, making money was literally like shooting fish in a barrel. You just had to show up and be halfway intelligent. And I qualify for that. I was halfway intelligent, and you could make a ton of money. Those days are over. Now you've got to be a samurai. And so so I think what's happening is there was this lazy gap from like literally from 94 till I don't know, 08. It lasted a long time.
Right.
Where basically you could just get a lot of stuff done. Now it's a battle. It's a battle.
Well, and I think it actually got extended maybe even to recent times, because up till about 2018 or 2017, you could get clicks for almost nothing off of Facebook and generate traffic. And then there was a period where you can generate Facebook groups, and Facebook was juicing those so that you could get a bunch of traffic. And then of course 2020 saw a huge increase in the number of consumers that were interested in buying online type products, and there was another couple of years. But I can tell you, I've talked to a lot of online businesses the last couple of years, and it's gotten leaner and leaner. And it's like you say, it has absolutely gotten harder out there. One of the really, I think you're brilliant at a lot of things and analogies of helping understand how things work. In the book, there is this analogy around the milk carton,
Oh
and
yeah.
I think that was useful. That it really helps to better understand what you'd otherwise take for granted.
Yeah, yeah, and I put that analogy in there to explain. There was this huge attitude in the early days of the internet, of the commercial internet, that it was wrong to do commercial things on the internet. That it was like there was
Mhm.
almost an internet wide riot the first day that somebody dared put a banner ad on a homepage. That flipped people right out of their minds, right? And I mean, and a lot of people like Wired magazine, they were like, the Electronic Freedom Foundation. There was all this talk about, commercialization is going to ruin the internet. And my point way back then was, look, if we don't commercialize this, we're not going to have this thing. And if I could just take a moment to talk about this critical point, all this stuff that we have, Amazon, Google, TikTok, Bitcoin, ChatGPT, it all runs on the web. I want
Mhm.
everybody to understand this. We almost didn't get the web.
Yes.
I'm not talking about didn't understand the web. We almost didn't have a web. Okay,
Mhm.
and this, I think people need to know this, right? And the reason we have a web is that the web is supported by advertising, just like TV is, just like
Mhm.
radio, just like newspaper, just like magazine. But yeah, but hard to believe, in the early 1990s when all this was getting going, it was the dominant attitude. You cannot advertise on the internet. It's
Mhm.
crass. It's gross. It's a perversion. It's
Right.
a horror show. You can't do it. And I'm like, guys, we may not want to do it. We may love this pristine, freewheeling, free love kind of thing going on the internet, but we got to pay the bills.
Mhm.
People that create content have to be able to pay their bills. Uh,
Mhm.
uh, People have to have a reason, and the only reason people got on the internet was because of the content. It's just this chicken and egg situation,
Mhm.
right? So we have to have a way for the content developers to pay their bills. Guys, the answer is advertising, right? So the point I wanted to make, because unfortunately, uh, we seem to be going very socialist in our country lately, right? And I have a lot of sympathy for being aware of people that are struggling and helping people that are struggling. We have to do that. We have to do that, right? But we also have to understand that this whole thing runs on business, right? And so I was talking about the milk. You go to the store and there's a milk. You need more milk, let's say, right? And there's a carton of milk in the supermarket. If you reconstruct all the different people that have to be paid for you to be able to go to a thing, open the door, and pull out a cart, it's mind-boggling. Somebody has to be breeding those cows. Somebody has to be taking care of those cows. Somebody has to be a farmland broker so the farmer can buy the land. Somebody has to be a contractor to build the barn. Somebody has to manufacture all those things that milk the cow automatically. You have to have a crew of people that show up and milk the cow and clean everything up every day. Then somebody's got to come with a big truck and pick up the milk and bring it to the plant. And then someone's got to build that plant. Somebody had to be the real estate broker, the commercial. I mean, there's a cast of thousands of people, and that applies to every single thing you see in every single store you ever go to, right? So we need to teach young people this. And now I'm talking about kids, because I think every
Yeah.
mental adult, whether they're 18 or 85 years old, understands this. But we want to make sure that our
Mhm.
kids understand that this whole show runs on initiative and free enterprise
Mhm.
and people being reliable and responsible and focused and doing specific things that are commercial, right? So anyway, that was why I put that in the book, because
Yeah.
I wanted to just counter any myth that we could ever have an economy based on, basically communism.
Right.
Like it doesn't work, guys. Trust me. Read the history. We need individual entrepreneurs that are rewarded for doing a job well, right?
Mhm.
We have to stay out of their way and let them do their job. Right. So that was the why I got into the milk crate, the milk carton analogy. Just
Well, and I guess we fire we you open up your laptop and you fire it up and you connect to the web, and the Wi-Fi router that or one, the technology that went into the computer, because the computer itself had somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 vendors to create all the different components and the components of the
yeah,
components that are in there in order for that thing to be sitting on your desk, not to mention the manufacturing and shipping and retail and all of that. Then the Wi-Fi router, and then the Wi-Fi router is connected to a modem. Each of those have to have technology that was, initially created, back 35 years ago, and then, optimized in those years. And then beyond that, when you connect to the internet, there is some sort of fiber optic or cable TV wire that had to be installed at some point, both on the street and then up to you, and then that goes into a server where there are people maintaining that, and then that goes out. And it's really appreciating, one, how fragile it all is,
yeah,
and how, particularly, after a storm, I live in Florida, and you can go for a few days or even a week without the internet. It's not the number one priority of emergency management to get the internet back up, but it is amazing how precious it is, and as you say, how it depends on entrepreneurs who are looking to each make a profit and make a living in their own way.
yeah. It's kind of miraculous, and then we've described all the technical things that have to happen, but the fundamental thing that has to happen, and this was really apparent to me in '93 and '94, is there has to be content.
Mm.
Abundance, a super abundance of content. Like, for instance, if I sold you a 3D viewing device, and you're like, well, that's interesting, Ken. What can I do with it? Oh, well, nothing, because there's only one show. It's like,
Right.
I'm not going to buy that thing, right?
Yes, yes.
So the thing that drove the internet was the content. Now, first you had to have the engineers lay the
Right.
foundation, build the road, but then you had to have basically people drive on the road, right? And then those people needed to be supported. So to answer your question, which you asked a long time ago, and we're finally going to get to the crescendo, and I'm actually going to answer it. I was racking my brain, and as was everyone else. How is this thing going to pay for itself? Yeah, we got the technology, we got TCP/IP, we got the fiber cable, we can do it all. But why are people going to get an internet account in the first place? Why are people going to pay I don't know what people pay now, but back then it was $29 a month.
Yes, sir.
Why are people going to do that? Why are they going to download the browser in the first place? They're
Right.
only going to do it if there's amazing content that they want. But there was no content. There was a time when there were so few websites. You may remember back here that they would there was a website, the website of the day.
Yep.
And everybody go, oh, a website on giraffes. Wow, that's fantastic. We'll all go look at it. That's what life was like. We were like primitive people banging rocks
There,
together.
Well, the first directory of the web was essentially the same type of directory that you'd have at the library, where there was, categories and subcategories, and you'd navigate using the Dewey Decimal System as applied to the internet. And so you'd go and you'd find the category of information you wanted and click on that, and that would open up a listing of websites that had that type of information.
Yep, that's Yahoo, and it was, and in the early months, and those months there was a lot of early months that was all done manually. Think about that. Now,
Yeah.
so that, and by the way, that was such a critically important thing, because
Yes.
without, we take all these things for granted, but without directories, without search engines, the internet is
Right.
literally like a library. You just, hey, every book in the world, we'll just throw it in a big pile. And it's like, okay, all the information in the world is there, but how do I find my
Right.
book? We did not have an answer to that in 1993. There were a lot of attempts at different things. There was a thing called Gopher. There was a thing called Waze, but
Mhm.
nothing was really clicking. So anyway, so I'm looking at all this going, we got to get this multimedia stuff on the internet. We just have to do it. We have to have
Mhm.
beautiful video. We have to have audio. We have to have it all. right? And the internet people were telling me, well, it's technically feasible, but not with the current modem speed. So I'm going like, I know it's not feasible now, but that's what we have to be looking at, right?
Right.
Because how are we going to get people to come? We can get geeks to come to the internet, but how are we
Yes.
going to get grandma? How are we going to get,
Exactly.
normal people, right? So they really weren't thinking about that. And then the multimedia people, as I was saying earlier, they were like, well, we're not going to develop for the web because we can't do any of our fancy stuff. I said, yeah, but that's where the market is. That's where the
Right.
market's going to be. So we were all racking our brains at that time, trying to figure out how is this thing going to pay for itself, to go back to that fundamental question. And I came up, I mean, this was sort of an obvious answer, but I kind of was one of the first people to articulate it. It's got to be through advertising. Now, the next piece is, what is that advertising going to look like?
That's it.
We didn't have a banner ad until October of 1994. That was the first banner ad.
Wow.
Think about that. And so I was actually, I was more than a little bit involved in that.
Exactly.
And I'll tell this story because I think
Yeah.
it's important. So I had been to a conference in '93 called One BBS Con. It was all about bulletin boards, which is a whole nother rabbit hole. Yeah.
What the internet was before, pre-internet.
Yeah, there were people online before the internet, and they were on these things called BBSs, computer bulletin board systems. There were big ones like CompuServe, AOL. Some people have heard of that. And then there were thousands of little ones. So the big annual convention was One BBS Con. So in 1993, I went to it, and it was 99% tech talk.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was a panel that said, okay, internet commercial. This is 1993. Imagine this, 1993, internet commercialization. Let's have a panel on it. The topic was, can the internet be commercialized ever? Will it ever happen? Not how to do it or how to do it better. Not that, but is it even possible for it to be commercialized at all? And so this is the leading conference on the planet. And they had the leading guys in the world who were studying that question, right? So we're in August 1993. Split decision. Half of them said, it's never going to be a commercial medium. Half said, I think it can, but we don't know how.
Right.
The best idea that I heard on that panel, arbitrage with fax. So we'd have you'd type your message, you'd hit a button, it would go to a server, and then it would be directed to a fax machine in Johannesburg, South Africa. So instead of having, now kids won't know this, but to call South Africa from the United States, you're looking at $5 to $10.
Right.
That's for a short call. Right. So the idea that you could send a fax via the internet, that was the state of the art of internet commercialization thinking in August of 1993. That's the interesting thing about the book, because I was at so many places and I was either recording stuff or producing stuff, and I was always with the top audiences, either in the audience or speaking to the audience. I have time capsules of exactly where we were at every single moment, right?
That's amazing.
Yeah. So now it's now. So I'm looking at this going, I love this internet thing. I love this multimedia thing, but I want multimedia on the internet. and I want it. I really wanted it. Like I was up at night, so this is all that I could think about. And so I'm going to this guy, I'm talking to that guy, I'm going to this conference, I'm going to that conference. I'm trying to find the guy that knows. There was no guy that knew. So I said, okay, I'm going to have to try to figure it out myself.
Wow.
I mean, really, and it's in the book. I tell the whole story. So it's now 94. Netscape just got founded. So the first company, we all take browsers for granted, but there was a time when there was no browser, and the web was lines of text.
Right.
So the browser was, now you can see pictures, and that was the beginning. It was very important. Those guys made it commercial in April 4th of 1994. They got together. You got Jim Clark from Silicon Graphics, founder of Silicon Graphics, Mark Andreessen, the young kid who developed the browser with his buddies. They got together and they said, we're going to sell browsers. We're going to sell servers. We're going to make them really good.
Right.
All right. So that was a big move, right? And I saw that, and that gave me like, oh, wow, finally, this is going to get serious. We finally have some kind of a shot at this. Because if if nobody's making browsers and servers that are reliable and are supported and work, we can't have a web.
Right.
Right?
Totally.
Does everybody grasp this? So I'm like, okay, good. That might be covered. We got a high tech superstar, Jim Clark, brilliant man. People may not know this, but any special effect you've ever seen in the movies in the
Right.
in the last 20 years, that all originated with Jim Clark, Silicon Graphics, and Industrial Light and Magic, George Lucas,
Right.
using the tools. But it was Silicon Graphics that made the tools, and that's all Jim Clark.
Wow.
And nobody even thinks about this, but without Jim Clark, we would still be, I don't know what the movies would look like, right? So you had that guy, and then you had the guy that developed the first browser. They got together. So I said, okay, good, we got something. So then I reached out to, I tried to find advertising agency people that were interested in this question.
Yes.
They were not interested in this question. They couldn't, again,
Right.
they already had a business. They were already doing great. Why should they say, well, let's take time from TV ads and magazine ads and all that we're doing there, and let's look at this network that's 300 baud modems and nobody even has a modem, and let's divert our attention to that. I understand why they didn't do it, but I'm telling you, and I got the time capsule, they didn't do it. They did not do it. And that's kind of the point of the book. It wasn't Silicon Valley that made the internet work. It wasn't Madison Avenue. It wasn't Wall Street. It wasn't the Pentagon. It was the people that sold ads and produced content that made this thing happen. So
that's awesome.
I finally found a guy who was young, interested. I think we were about the same age. He might have been a little younger than me. I was like 34. He might have been, late 20s, early 30s. And he was a media buyer for a very well-known ad agency called Hal Riney and Partners. They were in San Francisco, but they had an international, global reputation. And the media buyer, I think everybody knows what that is, but in those days it meant you'd buy TV spots, you'd buy radio spots, and so on. So I heard him give a talk, and he was farsighted, and he said, guys, we're all buying media now. What are we going to do when there's 500 TV channels?
Right.
Because that was an issue in 1994. So at the end of his talk, I went up to him and I said, you know what? I think it's going to be even worse. I think there's going to be 5 million TV channels. Now, I thought I was wildly exaggerating. I thought I was, what's that word? I don't know, whatever. We use the word exaggerating. I thought I was just, giving some dramatic, over the top, way impossible. Well, of course, I underestimated.
Yep.
Right? Because every YouTube channel is a TV channel.
Totally. So
we have many, many, many millions of TV channels, many, many millions. Yep. There are 14 billion individual videos on YouTube now. So at any point, I went up to him, and his name was Rick Boyce. I said, Rick, what do you think of this? And I said, have you ever heard of the World Wide Web? He says, I've heard of it, but I don't know much about it. I said, let me tutor you on it. He said, great. So I went to his office, and we're talking, going back and forth. And I said, what are the ads going to look like, Rick? He goes, I don't know. I said, Rick, I don't know either. I mean, this is now, I'll give you the date, because now, right, we're talking like a super high-level professional media buyer for a super high-level ad agency. I'm going to guess that was like February or March 1994. That was the state of the art. We don't know.
Right.
Yeah. So, but he did something really valuable for me. And we all know this. We all know the standard rate and data service books, right? You got Gary Halbert always used to, the great Gary Halbert, Caleb, of course, one of the proteges of the great Gary Halbert. It's a book, and actually it's a volume of books. One's for TV, one's for radio, one's for magazines, and one's for newspapers, and one's for mailing lists. And Gary Halbert used to go through that, and he said, oh, here's a mailing list of 5,000 people, 500,000 people, who like to buy tchotchkes.
Right.
It must be a market. Here's the list. Here's what they cost. Let me go into the tchotchke business, right?
Right.
So as a media buyer, he had all those things up on the wall, on a shelf. I can visualize this now. He's sitting there. I'm sitting here. There's a shelf there. It's high up. I don't know why. It's like it wasn't a bookcase. It was a shelf. And he had them all there. Right.
Wow.
And he goes, yeah, I'll tell you this though, Ken. And he pulled down one of the volumes. It was entitled Miscellaneous. Right? He goes, I don't know what the ads will look like, but I think this is where they'll be listed. And I'm like, wow. wow, we finally have a place for internet advertising. It'll be in the miscellaneous volume of the standard rate and data service book.
Well, because that was, if there wouldn't be a place for it if it wasn't in that book at that time, for sure.
That would instantly, and because you got to think about it, logistics. Who's going to be making and buying ads?
Right.
Well, in those days, it was just the advertising agencies alone. Now everybody can do it, but those were the guys that were and did get the ball rolling and still spend quite a bit of money online, and they're very important. So if it existed, if it could find a place in the standard rate and data, then it could exist, right? So we were coming up to the 150th anniversary of the first official demonstration of the telegraph. I forget the date now. It was sometime in May 1844 was the year, and we were hitting the 150th anniversary, and it's like, that's a really important date. Let's do a conference on that date where we're all going to get together. I'm going to get Rick. I'm going to get my internet friends. It was mainly internet guys at the time who came to that conference, and we're going to sit down, and by God, we're going to figure out this ad model. We're just going to freaking figure it out, because we can't screw around anymore. Nobody has the answer. We're wasting time. Let's figure this freaking thing out, right? So I couldn't get the meeting hall for that exact date. So the meeting was actually on June 11th. So I had Mark Graham, who was a neighbor, who was called Mr. Internet, okay? Grasp this. In the entire computer industry on the planet Earth, there was one Mr. Internet, and that was Mark Graham. He was a neighbor. Then there was Mark Fleischman. Now, wrap your mind around this. This was the very first person to hang out a shingle and say, I'm a full-time professional web developer. The first man on earth, Mark Fleischman. There were guys working for government. There were guys working for corporations doing in-house web development. Not much, by the way, but there were some of them, but they were all on salary. The idea of being free, I actually worried for his future. I thought, geez, how's this guy going to make a living? How's he going to feed himself? That's where we were at in 19. But he was very smart. He was one of the first people to put on a real e-commerce site, way before Amazon, by the way. A real one that made sense, that had pictures and descriptions and order buttons and took money. I mean, he was the first man. He was also the first man to put a newspaper online, not archives of newspaper, but hey, here's the current issue of it was the Palo Alto Weekly.
That's awesome.
Now everybody does it. It's like nothing. Somebody had to be first. He was first. So we had Mark Graham, Mr. Internet, Mark Fleischman, Mr. Web Developer, and Rick Boyce, and an audience, because you always need an audience, because an audience keeps you on track, right? So we did I gave a talk, Mark Fleischman gave a talk, Mark Graham gave a talk. We were all talking about, and I have it all recorded. So these were the experts on the planet. Timestamp of exactly where we were June 11th, 1994. Not where we individually were, where the planet was.
The state of the art. Yeah, what was happening.
So we laid out the state of the art, and we didn't have an answer.
Ugh.
So it's getting to be the end of the conference, or it's just a one-day thing. And I'm thinking, man, we failed. Like, everybody's happy. We had a great event. Everybody, the presenters were happy. The audience was happy. Nobody was complaining about the event. Everybody was loving it. But I'm like, we failed. We didn't answer this question. So something just popped into my brain. And I said, Mark Graham, could you come over here? I want to ask you about something. Rick, come over here. And my understanding was so primitive then that I had to have Mark Graham there to make sure that what I was envisioning was even possible. So I said, Rick, here's how it works. You can put a little square on a page. Mm-hmm. And when people see it and click on it, it takes them to the big page. And you can have as many pages as you want.
Right.
And not only that, you can track how many people saw the little square and how many people clicked on it, and that will tell you how effective your advertising is. And so I turned to Mark Graham. I said, we can do that, right? Because I didn't know. And he said, yeah, no problem. Several months later, Rick left his really great job at a really great ad agency and became the head of business development for hotwiredmagazine.com, which was the very first ever on the planet in human history company that said, we're going to build a website and we're going to sell ads and we're going to make money and pay everybody.
That's awesome.
That never existed before.
Yes.
So, and what did they do? They put a little square on a page, and you clicked on it, and it brought you to a big page, and they counted the click-through rate. So now, now that happened in October of 1994. So we had our meeting in June. Rick got introduced to the idea. He hooked up with Hotwired, and he ended up being the guy that went out and sold this to AT&T, to MCI, to Volvo, to all these different things. That was the very first, and that really lit the fuse on the commercial side
Wow.
because they sold out all their ads, and they were selling $30,000 ad packages. The deal was you could sponsor a site on Hotwired's website, a section for $10,000 a month with a $30,000 minimum.
Yeah.
Right? So everybody's looking at that going, holy God, we can make money from this thing. I get it. We can put up content and sell ads. Wow, that's how we're going to do it.
That's awesome. I really love that deep dive and how it really gives believability. It's like this thing that's ubiquitous today that drives YouTube, that drives Google, that drives Facebook,
Bitcoin, that drives ChatGPT, that drives, it's all gone. You pull that thing out and it's all gone.
And so like the thread of the next innovation is really just making those types of connections and creating these technologies. You can, if Ken McCarthy can do it, he's brilliant, yes, but you can do it too. And one of the things I'd really like to buzz back to, all right, how do we make money today? How do we monetize our business? What do we do? And it brings me right back to your very first system seminar, which revealed a process of a 2002 process, but amazingly relevant now. But like what was in 2000, buzzing forward, from 94 to 2002, and then kind of looking back from a 2025 vision. What was your system in 2002 for making money online?
Here's the joke. I've got to look at my own book to make sure I don't leave anything out. But basically, you have to. It's so crazy. So the banner ad model got established relatively quickly. Believe it or not, Yahoo didn't even have a banner ad until January of 1996. So the little guys, the scrappers, had their banner ads in October of 94. Yahoo didn't get around to it until till almost a year and a half later. But the direct marketing model had still not taken root on the internet as of early 2000s. It just wasn't there. People were like, hey, we'll put up a web homepage, we'll put the URL in our ads, and we'll buy some ads from Yahoo, and we'll hope for the best. Remember, there was no Google AdWords then, right? Then pay-per-click came along, and that was the next big transformation. And it was something that I dreamed would be possible, right? That we could bid on clicks. Like we would recognize the relative value of clicks. Like if elephant feed, for example. Well, probably not a lot of people buying elephant feed, so that's going to be a low-level click.
Right.
High-tech legal advice. Well, that may be a big deal. So you might have to pay $150 if you're an attorney and you want to bring in startup companies. So that was the big thing. And then being able to buy specific keywords, that was huge, right? So once that was possible, then it finally became possible to really do direct marketing because you could track everything. You could see what you paid for your ad. You could see what the clicks were. You could see how the clicks turned into sales or not. And then you could say, hey, that keyword at that price is great. That keyword at that price, it's dog. Get rid of it, right? Mm-hmm. So that was the foundation of everything. That's why I started the system seminar in the first place, because this new technology had come out, and a few scrapping people, the real geniuses of the world were actually using it, but the rest of the world didn't even know what to do with it. Even the guys that were marketing it didn't know how to market it properly. And we know that because they were selling the clicks for a penny each. Clicks that you now would pay $150 for, you could have bought for a penny.
Many of them, yeah.
Yeah. So then I said, okay, look, you need a mailing list, guys. Don't just throw up a homepage. and create a pretext for people to give you their email address. Wow, big idea. People weren't doing it. And I said, you have to use some craft about it. You can't just say, join my newsletter or sign up for my list. That might have worked in 1994. That's not going to work in 2000. Everybody's doing that. You have to be more. So the opt-in box, I didn't invent it, but I included it in this system. The other thing that I helped promote, again, I didn't invent long copy, but I was one of the very original people to say, yes, long copy, it will work on the web. And that, by the way, that translates into video sales letters, right? And people, at the time, people were saying, nobody's going to read all that stuff on the web. I said, I
Totally.
guarantee, if they're interested and it's the right offer for them and your copy's good and you're off and the value prop, they're going to read. But nobody
Well,
understood this in 2002.
I even
So
had a client today ask me, is somebody going to read all that?
it's
It's still a misconception.
it's never going to end, right? Um, and then I introduced the idea of A/B split testing to my students. I learned later that Google discovered it for themselves in 2000. Of course, I wrote a book on 1991 about it, and I didn't invent A/B split testing. But in terms of the entrepreneurial internet marketing world, I was the first. In fact, at the very first system seminars, I gave out copies of my 1991 book, testing the key to direct marketing profits, whatever I called it. Um, so number one, number one was test, and you can test everything. You can test book titles, you can test offers, you can test prices, you can test, a million and one things. In fact, the 4 Hour Work Week was the result. And he came up with that book in 2007. In 2002, we taught people explicitly how to test book
Right.
titles using A/B split tests on Google.
There.
Um, when you're early, it's like if the first guy to land in the first European in Virginia, he could say, "Well, I'm the first guy to play the harmonica. I'm the first guy to milk a cow. I just happen to be that guy." It's just and
That's
and
pretty
and
awesome.
and the thing that I want to say, my favorite saying about creativity is this, and it came from Edwin Land, who invented the Polaroid camera, which nobody who's our age won't even know what that is, but it was a brilliant invention. He said, "Creativity is the sudden cessation, the sudden ending of stupidity." Right? And so I feel that all my creative activity is not genius. It's this. Suddenly I became not stupid
Right.
on certain subjects. Right?
Well, you were at the forefront watching what others at the forefront were doing, and you weren't, once you figured out that there was no guy or no gal who knew, then you were smart to put yourself in that position. And it's not like now where the influencers, there's, there we're all talking about NFTs when Bitcoin was down, and now they're all back talking about, there's like a whole bunch of Me Too's. I mean, this was at a time when there was no one else talking about it, and frankly, there wasn't a whole lot of people who cared and to listen about it. But there were, the smart people did, and it really turned into a movement. And again, at that first system seminar, A/B testing, the compelling opt-in, having, like you said, some sort of newsletter, some sort of, art about why you should opt in, email follow-up, sales page with long copy, upsell, cross-sell, downsell, track and test, traffic and conversion, and my favorite, lifetime
Right. Right.
relationship.
Right.
These were these 8 foundations of the system in 2002, and it's the foundation of the systems and today. And
Yeah.
it's amazingly remarkable how much foresight you had, because there really isn't anything other than that even today.
Right. And the only thing I would add though is some people are playing it like a violin. They've taken those, and I have to say, Caleb, I have to shout out.
Yep.
When I read his book Conversion, I mean, my head's exploding. I'm like, oh my god, this is like I don't know if people, well, Jimi Hendrix, like this is the Jimi Hendrix of all this stuff. Or if you like classical music, this is the Paganini or the Horowitz of all
Totally.
this stuff. I really do. And I fully believe that. I think
That's awesome.
if people want to see, okay, where do we take this how do we get to a higher level? It's like understand the foundation first.
Mhm.
And I think those 8 principles that you mentioned, and they're in the book, that's the foundation. But then there's, hey, how can we play it really smart? And that's where Caleb's comes in, because that's just a fact. That's just a
Yes,
fact of life. That book is amazing. His work is amazing.
thank you. And the other thing I wanted to add is just, this was something that, I've been a fan for decades of Ken McCarthy and absolutely love. And you have a story about pricing models and the elasticity of pricing that is talk about a skybox. Skybox, and I love this story and have thought a long time about how I could, twist the story and knock it off in a way, but have not been able to come up with anything better than Ken McCarthy. When you're teaching pricing and elasticity of pricing, what is your skybox story that
Gotcha.
helps visualize that?
Gotcha. And I don't even remember when or how I came up with it, but it just popped into my head. I mean, the thing is, I'm always thinking, right? I'm always
Mm-hmm.
reading. I'm always trying to solve problems, and I'm an educator. So I'm always trying to explain things. And so I'm always looking for the best analogy that I can come up with. So years ago, this one popped into my head. I was thinking about the Super Bowl. It must have been Super Bowl time or something. And it suddenly dawned on me, like, there's one Super Bowl, right? This year, there's going to be one game. And there's a lot of different ways that people experience it. So on the one hand, you could just stay home in your pajamas, buy some Cheetos and watch the game, right? So that's pretty much zero. It's about as low level as you can get, right? Now, other people might go to the sports bar, be with their buddies, buy a few pitchers, watch it on the big screen. Everybody cheers together. That's like another level of experience, costs a little bit more, right? And then there are guys that actually go to the Super Bowl, right? Some of them may not have a lot of money, so they buy the seats way up in the bleachers. It's still expensive, but they're at the Super Bowl. They get to feel the vibe. It's amazing. And then some people get really select seats down, on the 50-yard line, and those guys are paying even more money, right? And they have an even greater experience. Then you have the sky boxes, and those, like 50, 80 people. I don't know how many they hold, and you got a bartender or multiple bartenders and people walking around with food. It's just unbelievable. And who knows what a skybox costs? I don't even know. I'm sure it's millions of dollars, right? And I realized it's all the same game. It's not like there's 10 different games. There's a game for the rich people, and there's a game for the people of modest means who don't want to spend a lot of money. It's one game. What all it is different levels of access and experience, right? So the people at the skybox, they're not buying a different game. They're buying a different experience of the game. So a lot of our content, and this is just reality. And if you're a good reader and you really know how to follow up and you really know how to do it, you can get almost everything you need from a book. I mean, I have to shout out again to Kayla's book. Yeah, that thing is a PhD times 10 on steroids to the nth degree, right? But, and I know this is myself, I have issues, different, all kinds of things I need to work on. So I read a book about it, but it doesn't become real until I write the big check. I don't, it's even for me, right? And I'm a good reader. I have a lot of initiative, but there was a case where I signed like a $3,000 thing, and I'm very happy with the value I got. And the guy recommended a $19 book as part of the package. I read the $19 book, but I read it with like laser vision because I just spent $3,000 to get the book recommended to me. And suddenly this multi-decade problem that I'd had, I was able to address.
Wow.
And by the way, a multi-decade problem that I've spent way north of six figures on, piecemeal here and there, this guy, that guy, and so on. But when I wrote the check and I committed, I was in the skybox. I guess is my point. So from the point of view of being someone marketing information, it's not that your information is going to suddenly get so insanely crazy, amazingly valuable that now it's worth thousands and thousands of dollars. It's just that different people at different levels with different levels of motivation and different levels of resources are willing to pay different amounts. It's the same, but it's the same game. So you still see the game. I'm at home in my pajamas, just watching the game. But if I'm in the skybox, I'm going to be paid. I don't think I'm making this clear. So when you're marketing, don't think that your information has to be good. It has to be good. It has to be solid. But don't think that, to justify a $5,000 or $10,000 or $15,000 price, I have to come up with a moonshot. No, right. You just have to, lay it all out, spoon feed it, create a spoon feeding system. And just the engagement that comes from writing the big check is going to motivate a percentage, because there are still people that will write a big check and do nothing.
Totally.
But a lot of people will write that big check, and you're serving them by packaging it so that it becomes a dramatic event where they are all in, because otherwise a lot of people never get there.
And I mean, it's an absolute brilliant analogy, because the actual content, the game doesn't change. What really changes the most is the target customer. The who is really different from the who that loves watching the game at home, the who that loves going to a sports bar, the who that goes to the game and sits in the bleachers, the who that goes to the 50-yard line, the club seats, and then certainly the who that likes to be in the skybox. Those are very different markets. And once you segment those markets and create a message that resonates, and have some sort of exclusivity, and where they can see their status, that it doesn't have to change all that much, and you're able to have that price elasticity. And that's it's an absolutely great story, Ken. It was, when I heard it, it was a great vision of clarity, and love it very much. And Ken, it's absolute honor to have you today, and think really. I love your book, How the Web Won, and it really gives a deep dive into the thinking, into the people that created the commercialization of the internet and the first system. And really what it does is help bring clarity to today's marketer, so that you have, one, the idea of possibility, that you are sitting with digital currency, with AI, you are on the cusp of what are going to be the next 30 years of technologies that are going to shape the experience that humans have. And all of it is in the early days. It is the 1994 of AI technology today. And simply people kind of doing on AI what they would otherwise do manually is essentially what the internet experience was in 94. And there's going to be a few folks that have these breakthrough ideas that are going to really change the human experience. And How the Web Won is a great primer in how those leaders step forward and bring those technologies to the fore. And Ken, I absolutely appreciate you and your book. Thank you so much for being my guest today.
Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
I'd love to know, based on what Ken and I were talking about today, what's been your experience with monetizing the internet? Share your thoughts below, and I look forward to hearing from you. And if you have a question about marketing, advertising, or monetization that you'd like my help with, all you got to do is send me an email to caleb@monetizationresearch.com, and Caleb or I will do our best to include a response in an upcoming episode. As always, the best way to stay in the loop with all things monetization is to join our free newsletter, Monetization Daily. Get it at monetizationresearch.com. We'll send you our favorite news, tips, tactics, and discoveries about how to monetize your business, which is ultimately all about increasing your profits. Again, head over to monetizationresearch.com.